Texas head coach Steve Sarkisian joining us here on Late Kick. You guys are right to be right back in the middle of padded practice here, so you start to learn a lot about the team. I've always been curious about this. Preview magazine's out there, and we talk about what we expect. But as a head coach, when do you first start to get like a real read on what you have as a team? When you get to December and it turns out the way it does, when did you start to figure out, hey, that's probably the way we're going?
Well, I think naturally you get that first inkling in spring ball, right? You find out about kind of, guys when they come back for the next season and just kind of where they're at from a mentality standpoint. New leadership needs to step up, how you're going to start to fill roles. And then in the summer, I think is when you really start to get a gauge for it, especially now with the new rules where you can work with them a couple hours a week. And you start to see the culture start to form and the leadership, the work ethic that it takes in summer conditioning. And then when you get back to here now to training camp and you start to see the growth, like I talked to the team about, I'm not trying to hold anybody to what they were a year ago or the way they performed in spring practice, because everybody should be improving. And if we're all improving, then we should have been made, really, really good growth from last season, this past spring, even this summer, to where you feel good about it. And that's something for me that's been exciting. I really feel like every player on our team has improved their play and it continues to improve it.
I know from where I sit, the roster looks night and day different than when you got there, but also the feel of like the Texas infrastructure, the recruiting infrastructure, like everything going on out there energy wise from the outside feels different. So from your standpoint, which is the only standpoint that matters, the day you got there to today, how night and day different does that place feel?
Well, it feels like hours now, again, that's not knocking anybody. There's a lot of ways to skin a cat in this profession, whether it's recruiting, developing your players, the schemes you run. But ultimately we all, you come in with a plan and you try to implement it. And year one, you feel like you're trying to coach everybody on how you want it to go, whether it's recruiting, whether it's media, whether it's player development in the weight room, whether it's nutrition, whether it's your scheme. And then you're trying to build depth. And what does your depth look like in year one and the players that fit your scheme and for the style of play? By the time you get to year three, if you're doing it right and you're consistent with your approach to things, we should be pretty dialed in on recruiting. We should be pretty dialed in our player development in the weight room and how we rehab and recover players. And we should be pretty dialed in schematically of the way we go about our business and the way we practice. And so it does feel different. And you feel like the players are, like I've touched on, I don't think at this point now we can say the players are bought into what we're doing, right? You were trying to get that buy-in in year one. In year three, now I feel like our players are contributing to our culture and what we're about, and they're elevating kind of who we are.
You just mentioned something there. I'd love for you to go deeper in this. So, anytime we talk to coaches at the end of the year, the ones that are headed to the conference championship game or the playoff, they always talk about how their teams became player-led teams. And in some cases, that's from spring on. You were talking about just an overall program there. It goes from telling people what you want it to be to the people inside the program, administratively, staff, players, actively contributing to it. When do you feel that hourglass start to kind of shift, or when did you feel it at Texas?
Well, I felt it last year. I really felt it at the end of our first year when, went through a rough stretch in my first year here. And there was a lot of tough losses and we lost a tough game. And I'll never forget Roshan Johnson standing up in the locker room and he asked to speak to the team and really to everybody in the organization that was in the locker room. And, and at that point you could feel a shift. Like no longer was it just me trying to say what we needed to be. The players started to speak it. And I think that bled into last season. Roshan was a tremendous leader. Bijan was a tremendous leader. DeMarvion Overshown. The beauty of this year is I don't know if necessarily we have leaders like them or as good as them or whatever, however you want to call it, but we have more people in that space. And how do we get there? All the players that are here in year three in this program since I got here chose to stay, right? We're living in this world of transfer portal. But all those guys, the Jalen Fords, the Jordan Whittington, the Christian Jones, the Jaron Thompsons, the Alfred Collins, the Byron Murphys, those guys started to believe in what we brought to the program. They signed up for something different, but they're believing in what we're doing. Then the younger players were players that we signed that believed in what we were doing and said, I want to go do that. And so now you really feel a locker room full of guys that are committed to what we do and how we do and why we do what we do. And so we have more people speaking the same language. I think at the end of the day, as coaches, we try to set expectations and a standard for how things should be done. Well, now the players understand what those expectations are, and they're speaking to the standard and what it's going to take. And then when somebody's not meeting that standard, they're holding guys accountable to it.
It's funny when I turn on any kind of show or I'll crack open any magazine, everyone who talks about Texas, they're talking about the receiver room, they're talking about the offense, they're talking about quarterback, which I'm fascinated in as well. But what's funny is when we've talked about Texas on this show, I'm interested in the secondary when you guys got Cattle on. I was at the Cincinnati, Arkansas game last year. He goes down week 1, and it was a huge blow for Arkansas. And you guys have gotten him, and folks closer to the program, they keep telling you, watch Catalan. As he goes, maybe that secondary goes. What kind of depth do you think you guys have in the secondary? And if you thread the health needle and everything goes as you would love it to, what kind of unit could you have there overall?
I really like our secondary. I'll talk about Catalan first. What a great addition to our team. Never mind just our secondary. He comes with the real intent every single day. He's very mature. He's very meticulous in his approach. The passion is there. The communication is there. And then the playmaking is there. And I think obviously there's a level of physicality to his play that you have to have at safety that he definitely plays with. But we're returning 3 starters there as well. And Ryan Watts, Jaron Thompson and Jade Barron. And Jade has been a fantastic player for us at nickel, a guy who's been a playmaker in the run game, the pass game, creating turnovers. But we have a lot of really good young players too. Terrence Brooks really came on at the end of last season. We had an addition and a transfer in Gavin Holmes from Wake Forest, who was a 2-year starter there. You look at a couple kind of high-level recruits in Derek Williams at safety, Malik Muhammad at corner, and then Jalen Gilbo actually was starting ahead of Jade Barron last year before a season-ending injury, so he's back. Not to mention a lot of other faces. So I like the depth. I like the mix of veteran players and the leadership they provide, but I also like some of the youth and the playmaking ability that they provide.
When you guys got A.D. Mitchell, it raised a lot of eyebrows in the SEC because people had watched A.D. Mitchell in flashes, and they always thought to themselves, if he were in maybe a different offense, maybe those flashes would be year-long. And now he's part of a receiver room I think is pretty versatile and also pretty deep. Do you have that receiver room where you want it now in year 3?
I really like that room. At the end of the day, I think that we've put a lot on Xavier Worthy for 2 years, and he came in as a true freshman. There was a lot on his plate. And he handled it and he took it and he had to know everywhere and move everywhere. And there was a lot, and he played a lot of snaps and a lot of reps, and Jordan Whittington as well. I think now with the addition of AD Mitchell, getting in a healthy Isaiah Nair, who we missed last year, who transferred from Wyoming, the addition of a Jonte Cook, the kind of steady play of Casey Kane being back, and then DeAndre Moore, Ryan Niblett. We've got a really talented room. I think one that where we can spread the field a little bit more, one that where guys aren't feeling like I have to be the one to make the play and Xavier's got to beat double coverage every play, because AD Mitchell's a good player. Jordan Whittington's a good player. Isaiah Nair's a good player. Jonte Cook can be a player, not to mention, how are you going to defend JT Sanders? And so ultimately, historically for me, when we've had our best offenses, we've been able to deploy people across the field that make it difficult for you to kind of pin down and hone in on. And in turn, the ball can get spread out when the quarterback knows to go with the ball. Guys can make plays in space because they're getting those one-on-one matchups.
I'll get you out of here on this. Texas head coach Steve Sarkisian, go all the way back. First time someone ever gave you the opportunity to be a head coach, all the way to today in 2023. What's the one thing that's changed the most about you, your approach, your philosophy as a head coach?
I think probably the biggest thing is just diving into the players, really having a connection with the players. When I was a young head coach at the University of Washington, it was about how am I going to squeeze every ounce of juice out of these guys, and how are we going to win? And it was so focused on winning and kind of result oriented, if you want to call it that way. And now I think my connection with the players is such that, how do I pour into them in a way that is not always about just football, but about life and the impact that I can have on these guys on a daily basis, to where we can develop that trust, connection, that ultimately will then pour into the way we play. And if we do it the right way and we play really well, we'll get the results that we're looking for. So I think that's probably been the biggest change, is just connection with our players. And a lot of that, so for some guys, starts in the recruiting process. For some of the guys, it's when they're here, especially the guys that you inherit. But inevitably, I think now I look back on my time, it's not having a connection with a handful of guys on this team. I feel like I've got a connection with all 120, and I try to be really intentional about that.
Texas head coach Steve Sarkisian. Coach, it's a pleasure. We appreciate you joining us.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate it, buddy.